Hello, and welcome back to my basement. Thanks for joining me. Do you guys know David Lynch?
Crawl over there and crawl around and cry like a baby. See, real loud.
Get real.
I'm so depressed I don't know what I'm doing.
He might. He's basically created his own style of film. Lynchian is a term to describe very strange, odd, almost disorienting, surreal elements in a work, often film or television. And he's created several successful films like Eraserhead, Mulholland Drive, and he's also created Twin Peaks, which is one of the most successful television shows of the 90s. I've seen two films of his, Eraserhead and Mulholland Drive. Eraserhead I really loved, I thought it was great, and Mulholland Drive is my second favorite film of all time. So with the new re-release of his 2006 film, Inland Empire, which was the last film he ever made, I thought we would take a look at his entire filmography, starting from Eraserhead all the way to Inland Empire. Now, I'm not going to be talking about his television shows, simply his full-length feature films. So I'm not going to be watching seasons 1, 2, or 3 of Twin Peaks. Many other people have created amazing videos about Twin Peaks, which I would suggest you would watch. So without further ado, let's get into the films of David Lynch, starting with his first film. David Lynch has always remained adamant that there is no correct way to interpret his films. They are meant to be viewed and perceived in different ways by different people. However, some of his movies are more interpretable than others. Films like Eraserhead or Mulholland Drive have multiple interpretations and are incredibly abstract. And others are more straightforward stories that may still have some surrealist elements in them, but overall they're more direct in their storytelling, like The Charade Story or The Elephant Man. Eraserhead falls into the former category. The movie's incredibly weird and abstract in its storytelling, but that's how it's meant to be. You know, very few elements are meant to be taken literally. The film's meant to be interpreted to tell a story. Despite the very distinct and almost in-your-face stylistic decisions, the movie's premise is actually really straightforward once you get down to the meat of it. This movie is about a regular, working-class individual named Henry Spencer. He has a girlfriend, and one day he finds out that he got his girlfriend pregnant, and the rest of the film dives into Henry's fears and anxieties around being a father. Despite the film not holding your hand, the movie's metaphors are rather apparent and obvious. Once you get past the layer of abstract surrealism, the story is actually pretty straightforward. But sometimes it feels a little stressed out, and the acting isn't always the best. This is his first film after all. I don't think the style of Eraserhead is all that necessary to tell its story, but it certainly has a very distinct visual style, which certainly helped lead to its cult success in the underground film sphere. You can certainly see in this film that David Lynch had a very personal story he wanted to tell, and he was able to tell that story with a very distinct visual style. Sure, it's a little long at points. Some of the moments in the film seem kind of drawn out and a little pointless. The acting isn't always great, but I do think Jack Nance's performance as Henry Spencer is one of the best performances in the whole movie, and he does a really great job at playing this character, both serious and actually showing his internal fears and anxieties about being a father, while still feeding into that very abstract David Lynch style. The cinematography and directing also shows a lot of promise for David Lynch. You know, it's not the best movie ever made by any means. It's not even David Lynch's best movie. But I think it will always hold a special place in my heart because it's the first ever David Lynch movie I saw, and it really introduced me to his whole filmography. And also, it's a really great movie for being the first feature from David Lynch. The movie is able to perfectly balance its distinct blend of horror, humor, and suspense. And of course, it's the first feature, so it will have flaws. But that's to be expected. And I don't think it was expected of David Lynch to make a movie this good for his first feature. And it shows how amazing David Lynch is as a director, and how promising his career looked at this point, and it really shows you how he was able to make such masterpieces later in his career. So, even though it's not perfect, it's still pretty darn good. And with that being said, I want to give this one a 9 out of 10. I don't see this film talked about or referenced as much as this other work, which I can see why. This isn't as surreal as his other work. It's probably his second most straightforward movie, because it's really just a normal historical period drama. But it's a real shame that this movie isn't talked about, because it's still a great movie. It's clear he hasn't found his footing as a director quite yet. I mean, it's only a second feature, but I think it's really cool how many styles and how much metamorphosis David Lynch's filmography went through this early in his career. He tried so many different things, and some of it worked and some of it doesn't. But I think this one did work. Unlike Eraserhead, this film is not nearly as surreal or abstract as that one. It has some hints of Lynchian surrealism, with some scenes diving into the more surreal, and the whole film having a strange and suspenseful aura about it, but the movie itself is still a rather straightforward period piece about a disfigured man trying to be accepted by everyday society. It has a very interesting premise that is pretty thoroughly explored throughout the film. The film is very well written, the acting from all the actors is amazing. The story itself is actually based on real people and real events, and it uses these real events to tell a story about how society views John as his deformities. No one except for Frederick really cares about the person. They only care about how he looks. Even when he is accepted by society, he's still not viewed as a human being. People only care about him because he is able to act normal, despite not fitting the mold of what we expect a normal person to look like. I mean, it has a happy and heartwarming ending, but it's still filled with this bleakness that Lynch is so well known for. Despite him being accepted by society, if you look deeper, it's apparent he's still being exploited by everyone. He's not being used and abused by an abusive power to perform, to make money, no, but Frederick still uses him to kind of garner fame. But no one cares about the Elephant Man. They only care about his deformities. Nobody cares about the man underneath that. No one cares about the person that lives in that body. They only care about what he looks. And sure, Frederick doesn't. Frederick likes him, and there's other people that go on to like him throughout the movie. And there's certainly some people that do care, but the masses only think of him as this deformed person. Not even a person, they think of him as his deformities. That's who he is now. That's who he is in the eyes of society. And although, yes, he is accepted and he has a much better life than he did, it's still a bittersweet ending. Because even though he is accepted, he's never going to be viewed in the same light as his contemporaries. And that's kind of depressing. This film isn't the best Lynch film. It's not even the most Lynchian Lynch film, but it is still a great film, despite it being one of his most normal films. I'm really excited to see how his career progresses from this point forward. So I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. This is almost a reverse Lynch film. This is like the opposite of what he usually makes. This film explicitly tells you what the film is, right? Like, and I mean explicitly. Like, you could see a character, like, acting confused for a second. Like, he's like, And then the voiceover would be like, this character was very confused. He did not know what was going on. Like, oh, we can tell that. We have context. Like, even when there is context, it feels the need to spell everything out for us. Even when there's moments in the film that you think would benefit from being purposely ambiguous. Like, when he has to put his hand in the box, you'd think, oh, yeah, maybe, like, don't show what his hand is, what's actually happening to his hand in the box. Maybe just let us, like, see his reaction and see how visceral that reaction is and feel that pain, like, in our heads and imagine what that pain would feel like. No, you show it to us. Like, bro, like, we don't need that. We don't need this here. But it still doesn't. This movie does not want you to interpret anything under any circumstances. It makes it so clear what is going on that it's annoying. This movie makes so much sense that it makes no sense. I mean, this movie is just so boring. It kind of feels like a generic 80s sci-fi movie, but with a lot of added and unneeded exposition. Sure, there's some, like, Lynchisms that fall through the cracks. Like, all the scenes with the Baron show that. There's, like, a random cat being milked at one point. These things, they're just so few and far between that I can't even enjoy how odd it is, because it's not really that odd. It's just like a normal movie that gets really annoying. This movie is really infuriating, especially towards the end. The final act just feels so rushed. It has a lot of dense story that takes place over the course of 2 whole years, and you would think, oh, well, it will show us some of the stuff that happens in that 2 years. Like, it's gonna show that to us. Like, it's a 2-hour movie, so a lot of the movie will be that, like, 2-year span. No. A lot of the movie is, like, his first few days on this new planet, and then it jumps 2 years, and we don't even know what happened during that 2 years. We're just like, oh, something happened, something. he furthered the plot during these 2 years, and then we just jump to the ending. And the ending relies on a lot of stuff that happened in the 2 years. It relies on us knowing that. So then we just have a bunch of voiceover telling us, oh, this is something that happened, and this is something that happened, and this is a new character we weren't introduced to yet that got introduced during these 2 years that we skipped. Like, you picked the worst possible time to do a time jump. It's trying to make itself make a lot of sense. It's trying to tell us everything that's going on to the point where, oh yes, that makes a lot of sense. It should make a lot of sense. If you're going to have that much exposition, you would expect, oh, well, it's going to make sense, right? No, it doesn't make any sense. It makes no sense. No sense was made in this whole movie. You know, as boring as this film was, it could have actually been a lot longer. Because that way it could have told us everything going on, or showed us everything that was going on. Because even though I want this movie to not, explicitly tell us everything that's going on, I still want it to show us everything going on. Not just skip past the whole section of movie. And the ending's just so anticlimactic. Like, it ends with just like a narration saying, yes, the main character did it. He became the person he seeks to become. He's the hand of God now. He did it. Woo! Yeah! Okay, why should I care? Like, it just comes out of nowhere. We don't even get a lot of build up to what the hand of God actually is. Like, what does it mean? I don't even understand what this movie was about, even though it has an insistence to make itself known what it is about. It tells me what it's about so often, it has so much, like, over narration that it's annoying, but I still have no idea what this movie was about at the end of the day. It's just a cool action space film. Whoa, yeah, cool 80s action sci-fi film that makes no sense. So I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. It'll probably get lower, because the more I think about it, the more I hate it, because this movie, like, stinks. It's garbage. After Dune, David Lynch took a swift turn to the surreal with Blue Velvet. Blue Velvet takes place in a stereotypical suburbia. The film peels back the mask of a picturesque town to expose the dark secrets that hide underneath. This is a great concept that I love. Combine this with some great acting, an amazing soundtrack, and David Lynch's surreal visual style, this would have to be a film that I love. You would think, right? No, I can't get into this movie. Like, for the life of me, I cannot get into it. This is like one of his most popular works. It's certainly one of the most critically acclaimed. This movie probably gets as much critical praise as something like the first season of Twin Peaks or Mulholland Drive does. Everyone loves this movie. Like, literally everybody does. But I don't. It's weird because I normally agree with the popular consensus on David Lynch movies. People think a movie's okay. I think it's okay. People think that a David Lynch movie is bad. I probably think it's bad. People think a David Lynch movie is amazing. I probably think it's amazing. But I just have an opinion on this movie that differs from everyone else. You know, there's just too many aspects about this movie that are holding it back from me despite its good aspects. Like I said before, I adore this premise. I think it's a great premise for a film, and I was loving this film up to a point. Blue Velvet is a mystery film. It's about Jeffrey solving a mystery, or at least it starts out that way. He does very immature and illegal things just to solve this mystery. He's a very amateur detective. It's not like there is any particular reason for him to solve said mystery, he just really wants to. I mean, as the film progresses, it becomes clear he's getting way over his head. This culminates with the crazy bad guy of the film, Frank, finding out about Jeffrey and taking him on a surreal and nightmarish joyride around the seedy underbelly of this seemingly perfect town. This felt like the best scene in the whole movie. It was a turning point for the story. Jeff's amateurish detective work slowly gets into more and more trouble. And before he knows it, he's in way too deep. He's in over his head. He thought that this world around him was just some perfect suburbia, but it turned out it's not. It's a dark and disturbing world that he has no place in. Car ride with Frank finally cements his place in this dark and disturbing underworld of suburbia. It shows him, I'm so far into this world, and I'm just never going to be able to get out of it anymore. Anything I try to do that's separate from this world, anything I try to accomplish that's outside of this, I can't. Because Frank knows about me. It kind of feels like that's gonna happen. Especially when he gets back from his date with Sandy. This car is tailing him. Like, oh, it's Frank. He thinks it's Frank. It's not Frank. It's some unrelated, like, school bully or something. And it turns out that Frank has no impact on his life. He ends up solving the mystery and turning in the evidence to a detective. And this detective is actually closely related to one of Frank's right-hand men. So you think, oh man, he's in on it, right? No. He was a part of the police force. He was a good guy, right? everyone who's a good guy is a good guy, and everyone who's a bad guy is a bad guy. So the detective saves the day, or detective helps him save the day, and yeah, Jeff saves the day. He kills Frank, and even Dorothy goes back to living a normal life with her kid. Good job, Jeff. You being a creep really paid off. You spying on women changing really paid off. You did a great job by being a weirdo. You did a great job by doing the worst thing you could have done. By investigating, doing this really terrible amateurish detective work that got you into some of the worst trouble and got the people around you into some of the worst trouble. You succeeded? That's how you win. You win by doing the worst thing possible. There's no repercussions for Jeff's character. And I can't like him. I hate him. And by the end, after he saves the day, everything goes back to the normal suburbia. It's like the only thing that was stopping this world from being a normal, perfect suburbia was Frank. Once he kills Frank, everything's normal again. There's no even inkling of anything being bad anymore. And it's just not. I like where this film was heading. I like the direction it was going, and I love the story. And then once the middle happened, everything just went downhill so steep. It was just like, oh, okay, this movie's good. This has a good story going for it. This has a lot of amazing plot elements. And it's just like, well, actually, him being a pervert pays off. And he's a good guy because he's a pervert. Like, what the hell? You know, I love the perfect suburbia vibe that this film has, and how it turns it on its head. It's basically a parody of this world that everyone considers to be perfect. But it really just doesn't work, because the ending of the story is just not strong at all. I really just wanted this to go in a different direction, and it didn't. Maybe that's my fault, but I don't like this movie, and I can't like this movie. It's just not possible for me. I'm glad other people do, and I wish I could, but I can't. So I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. I really want to give it something higher than that, and this is probably the highest I can feasibly give it. It might go lower later, but anything else just doesn't feel right. After Blue Velvet, David Lynch continued on the path of making surrealist fever dreams. His next film, Wild at Heart, would be released in 1990 and star Nicolas Cage and a returning actress, Laura Dern. Despite having an overall similar vibe to Blue Velvet, this film is not as widely talked about and is pretty hard to find. Even though this is the case, I actually prefer this film to Blue Velvet, strangely enough. Unlike in Blue Velvet, which doesn't fully commit to its over-the-top and insane nature, this film is full throttle insanity. There's no moment in this film that takes a break from the crazy, insane, and utterly captivating story. This insanity cannot be seen in just the visuals, but also the story and even the acting. This film is almost entirely built on its over-the-top comical performances. This is one of the only films that I think actually uses Nick Cage to his full potential. It's almost entirely built around that crazy performance of Nick Cage. And I'll be honest with you, this is probably one of the craziest performances I've seen Nick Cage in. I know he's had probably a lot more crazy performances in this, but this is one of his craziest, and it also is one of the best. It works the best out of all his crazy performances, even though it is that crazy, because this whole film matches that insanity. This film gets onto his level somehow. Even other characters, like Bobby, played by Willem Dafoe, also have this crazy and insane performance that you just cannot get anywhere else, and that's great, and that's why this movie works so well. This is also the film where Lynch really finds his footing in terms of style. It's not the best film in terms of actual story, but it screams Lynch from head to toe. It also has a very strange infatuation with the film The Wizard of Oz. I do kind of understand why, as it sort of relates to the fantasy that these characters are living in. The witch shows up right before something bad happens. Lula clicks her heels after she realizes that her and Sailor are in worse trouble than they were back home, and the good witch shows up right at the end and tells Sailor what he needs to do. The movie's over-the-top nature is also very funny, and I was laughing throughout the film, even when something that would be serious in another film happens. The movie's just so insane you can't take much of it seriously, which may be a problem in other movies, but here it actually works, because that's kind of what it's going for. Even with the film's in-your-face style, it still has plenty of substance. The intense sex and violence present in this movie makes sense with the characters and the story surrounding them. Lula and Sailor are both young, free spirits without a care in the world, and the universe around them reflects that. The film is not grounded in reality because these characters are not grounded in reality. This movie is not grounded in reality. This takes place in another alternate dimension with a much crazier and more insane feel. But as the film goes on, these characters have to start realizing that they can't act like this forever. They keep trying to run away from the world, but eventually it catches up to them. In the last hour of the film, they realize that not caring about anything has consequences. The story goes through a dramatic change in the last hour of the movie. Instead of them running away from Lula's mom, instead, Bobby Peru comes around and he gets Sailor involved in something that he probably shouldn't be involved in. And the only reason he does this, the only reason he gets involved with this, is because he wants to settle down. He wants to settle down with Lula and start a family because he realizes that's what he should do. But even though he tries to do this, he still can't because he can't ever run away from his past. Even though I love the story of this movie, I still think it could have been a little more cohesive, especially with the big story change in the movie. It switches from Lula's mom being the big villain to Bobby Peru being the big villain, which works from the story standpoint. But the actual structure of this movie kind of suffers because of it, because it doesn't feel cohesive. It doesn't really all lock together. It feels like one movie. It starts out as one movie, and then by the end it's a completely different thing. And Lula's mom doesn't really even come back. She just kind of like fizzles out. I mean, I like Bobby as the main villain, but his inclusion kind of comes out of nowhere. From a story standpoint, again, the story this movie's trying to tell, it makes sense, but in an actual, like, reality standpoint and the actual structure of this movie, the actual 3-act structure, it kind of just comes out of nowhere. And again, this movie isn't grounded in reality, of course, but I still would like a movie that makes some sort of sense. It just doesn't blindside you with a completely new character that somehow takes on a major role in the movie even though we've never seen him before. Because I knew Bobby Peru was the big villain of this movie, and the whole movie I was like, where is he? And then he just comes out and only becomes the main villain at the last half hour. And that kind of feels good because I love Bobby Peru, but it feels a little weird because, you know, even if he wasn't going to be the main villain until later, at least introduce him earlier. I don't know. This movie is really good and I like it, but a lot of the things that are set up at the first part of the movie, like the backstory with Lula's mom and all that, kind of just are gone by the last half of the movie. So, I don't know. This movie's kind of a mixed bag for me. I still like it more than I dislike it, but I think I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. It's still better than Blue Velvet, probably by a significant margin, but it still has some flaws, and it's not perfect, but it's still really good. Now, I know I said I wouldn't be talking about Twin Peaks, but one of David Lynch's feature films is a prequel to Twin Peaks, and because it's a feature film, I have to talk about it. I thought this would be kind of confusing because I haven't seen the show, so watching a prequel to it wouldn't make any sense, right? Well, it kind of has some moments that don't make all the sense in the world because, of course, they sort of rely on your previous knowledge of the story and these characters, but for the most part, the main meat of the movie makes a lot of sense independently from the TV show, which is crazy because this is a tie-in film to the TV show, and it still works without that tie-in.
There are some moments in this film that are kind of dependent on your knowledge of the show. The beginning of the film specifically is sort of retelling a story that we would already know if we watched the show, rather than introducing us to a brand new story, which doesn't really work if you're viewing it as a separate thing from the TV show. However, after the first 30 minutes of the movie, it really takes a big step in a different direction.
This film actually reminds me a bit of my favorite Lynch film, Mulholland Drive. Not in the story, but actually in the way the film's set up. It starts very surreal and confusing, but as it goes on, things start to make sense and everything just clicks. Even though the film's built around a world that already exists, it still works really well independently of that, and it still does a really good job at introducing Laura Palmer as a character and the characters and the world around her. We get to know Laura Palmer, her motivations, and her reasons for why she does what she does. And the ending's so utterly heartbreaking because even though she's been trying to run from her increasingly worsening home life, she's unable to. And the final scene in the Red Room is impactful and amazing. This has everything I would want from a Lynch film.
It's an amazing story that has a lot of depth on all fronts. Setting the story and the characters feel really well thought out and put together, and mix this in with a very Lynchian visual style, and you have a movie that I really enjoy. The only real issue I have with it is how the first 3 minutes feel entirely disconnected from the story of the film. It feels like a separate aspect of this universe that never really comes up again throughout the actual movie. There are other moments, especially towards the beginning, that assume that we already sort of know the world surrounding these characters, as well as the general attributes of them. Instead of introducing us to the world, it kind of just drops us in it. Also, there are some parts of the story that don't feel all that well developed. Despite these problems, I can't really knock the film too hard. The movie was made as an extension of a television series, and when viewed separately from it, it of course would be a little confusing, but this is mostly my fault, not the film, so I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10, and I'm really excited to see what David Lynch does next. David Lynch certainly lived up to that excitement with his next feature, Lost Highway. Lost Highway is probably David Lynch's most surreal and non-literal film so far. The movie starts out with a married couple played by Bill Pullman and Patricia Arquette. Both actors do amazing. Patricia Arquette does especially good seeing as she's playing two different characters. She plays both Renee, the wife of Bill Pullman's character, and Alice. The first 30 minutes or so of the movie are entirely, or almost entirely, disconnected from the rest of the movie. The movie begins with Fred and Renee living a normal life as a normal married couple in LA. But as it continues, things get more and more weird, and eventually this results in Fred murdering his wife. The rest of the film is seen through the eyes of a teenager named Pete, who meets a woman named Alice, and Alice has a very strange resemblance to Renee. The movie is very good at establishing a mysterious atmosphere around its story really early on. It also incorporates a lot of surreal elements, like the mysterious man in the white makeup who seems to be involved in the mystery somehow. As the movie goes on, it becomes clear that Pete is just Fred's creation, a creation he uses to cope with the death of his wife. These fantasies seem normal at first, but they slowly get weirder and weirder until the entire fabric of this dream world has crumbled beneath him, and Fred has to come to terms that he in fact murdered his wife. Now I'm not going to stand here and pretend I understand the entire movie. I don't. There's a lot of things I still don't understand, but I do have a general idea about what it's about. Things started to click into place for me around the end of the movie, but I think on a second watch, I'll understand more and more of this film. This is one of David Lynch's more surreal films like Mulholland Drive or Eraserhead, where they start to make more sense on a second watch as you look deeper into the actual meaning behind the film, not actually what's going on a surface level. But overall, this is a great premise that has an amazing story that's really developed through this Lynchian lens. I absolutely love the almost in-your-face 90s style of the movie with the music and the overall just cinematography and vibe of this movie. It's definitely a film that shows the style in its most pure form. By this point, it's clear that Lynch has entirely developed his very distinct Lynchian style, and this is the style he will continue to use for the rest of his career. So, I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. So yes, David Lynch continued to make surreal films after Lost Highway. That is, except for this movie, which is his most normal film yet. It's not really a Lynch film at all. It's actually a 90s Disney feel-good film. Yeah, it's really just a very straightforward movie about a man riding on his lawnmower to go see his brother. It's very heartwarming. But also, it does have a lot of deeper subtext about the meaning of family and life itself. This film follows Alvin Straight in his journey across state lines to see his brother Lyle. He makes this journey not through usual means of transportation, but instead via a riding lawnmower. The film covers all aspects of his journey, especially his interactions with others. The film is a very simple film, but an ultimately incredibly profound one. It's about getting older, about family, about life itself, and about moving on. Not focusing on your past mistakes you made or what may happen to you in the future, but instead living life in the now, embracing the moment, and doing all you can in the time you have left. It's a film that says so much without saying much at all. Even if David Lynch's films aren't your thing, I would recommend this one to you because this isn't really a David Lynch film. It's a film for everyone. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. The Shrike story was a very interesting detour in David Lynch's career, but next he would return to his world of disorienting surrealism and create Mulholland Drive. Many consider it to be his best film, and I consider it to be my second favorite film of all time. And really, I think it's David Lynch's magnum opus. This is the point where he peaked. This is where he realized his full potential, and he made the best thing he could make. This is where everything clicked into place. Honestly, I don't think Lynch could ever make a better film than this, because this is one of the best films ever made.
This film contains a lot of David Lynch's previous ideas. It has the mystery elements of Blue Velvet, the psychological thriller elements of Lost Highway, and the general vibe of something like Twin Peaks, and the amazing Lynchian surrealism that is present for all of his works can also be seen in this film. This could make the film feel bloated or messy, but the film is so well coordinated, it's very impressive. Every little detail adds up to something and comes back around in the end. Even with how confusing or disoriented the film may feel, it all just clicks into place by the final moments.
General overview of the story is that this movie is about a woman named Betty. She's a new and upcoming actress living in Hollywood, California. She uncovers a mystery about a woman who doesn't remember who she is at all. On a serious level, this movie is about these two women trying to figure out what's going on around them, and as the film goes on, they slowly start to uncover the sinister truth of Hollywood. Now, it does incorporate a lot of elements of David Lynch's earlier work, like Blue Velvet, with a lot of the very amateurish mystery-like feel. But I feel like this does it a lot better, because even though these characters have the same amateur sleuthing skills as Jeff from Blue Velvet, the movie actually uses that to tell its story. It shows that these two women, well, Betty in particular, actually, Betty, she is very naive about the world going around her. She thinks that everything's perfect, but by the end, we find out that it's not. Betty's life, Rita's life, the whole movie is not what it seems. And I would strongly recommend that if you have not seen this film, please do not watch the segment of the video. Please skip to the next segment. Because even though I did warn you about spoilers at the beginning of this video, I don't think it's sunk in enough for you how much this is important to not be spoiled for this movie. Because to watch this movie and get away everything that you need to get away from it, you have to watch it blind. So again, I'm not going to force you to do anything, but I'm begging you, please do not watch the rest of the segment if you have not seen this movie.
The film is also able to balance several different subplots. There are two main story threads in this movie on top of several other smaller side plots. These two stories may seem disconnected at first, but they slowly begin to cross over, ultimately resulting in the ending where it is revealed the whole film was all a fantasy. The key to solving this mystery was the physical key that they found at the beginning of the story.
The key opens the box, and the box holds the truth inside of it. Now, I don't mean a physical piece of paper that says, oh, this is the answer, this is what was going on. No, I mean literally the box is the truth. The key represents not only a physical key, but also a metaphorical key. The key to everything. Because the puzzle is not what it seems. It's not a flat puzzle that shows an image on it. No, it's one of those holographic puzzles that when you look at it from a different angle, it shows you what's actually going on in the picture. Because the film isn't real. Betty is not real. Betty is just a creation of Diane's imagination. Now, Diane is a woman who's in love with Camila, and Rita represents. Now, Betty and Rita's journey to solve this mystery is really just a creation of Diane's imagination. This is kind of where the Lost Highway gets incorporated into it, because the whole film up to this point was Diane's imagination. It's almost like Lost Highway starts out with the reality, and then you see this character's fantasy. Mulholland Drive starts out with the fantasy, and then it's revealed what the reality behind the situation is. And not only the part of the film with Betty and Rita is part of Diane's imagination, but also the other plot, which revolves around a director being forced to include someone in his movie against his will as a part of some underground cult type thing that promises this girl a role in this film. Otherwise, things will go really badly for the director. And this girl is Camila Rhodes, who in reality is Diane's lover. Now, the first plot with Betty and Rita shows the happy moments in Diane and Camila's relationships. The good times they shared together, and kind of this fantasy, this idealized version of what their love was like. The way that Diane imagined it, the way that Diane wants to see it. And the second plot shows Diane's bitterness towards Camila. She could do anything, And Camila took that away from her. Now she can't do anything. Now she can't get any role because Camila was promised this role, or so she thinks. This is the way she thinks to make her feel better. This is the fantasy she has in her head to make her feel okay about placing a hit on Camila, her lover. Because the key represents both the physical key in the fantasy, the metaphorical key for like the answers to the whole story, and the physical key in the real world. The key that is given to Diane once the hitman successfully takes out Camila and kills her. And the whole film is seen through the eyes of Diane in the process of grieving. Grieving with not only the death of her lover, but also coping with the fact that she killed her. It's a story where you watch the film the first time and you don't quite know what happened, but then as you continue to sit on it and think about it, it all just clicks. It fits in there like a puzzle. And as you watch it a second time, things start to make more and more sense. And not only this, but also the visual aspects of the film are crafted and executed to an expert degree. And there's comedy and levity and suspense and romance and tension, and basically every single aspect you could think could be in a movie is in this movie. Every feeling you could get from a movie is in this movie, and that's something that a lot of movies aren't able to accomplish, at least not successfully. But this one does it in the best possible way, to the highest degree, to the highest quality it could, and it works. Somehow this movie works with all the feelings inside of it. It might feel bloated, it might feel confusing, but this film is confusing, but in the best way. It's so hard to explain because I don't even understand all of it yet. It's a puzzle that no one can quite solve because it's just that good. Many of his movies, even if you don't think it's his best, you can at least understand and see that this is the most he's ever accomplished. This is the biggest thing he tried to make, and this is the most successful panned out for him. And that's crazy. And I applaud David Lynch for making something that's so powerful and so great. This movie is a 10 out of 10 in my books. But there is one more movie left. And this next movie is one I went to go see in theaters, yes. I'm talking about David Lynch's 2006 film, the final film he ever made, Inland Empire. This movie was filmed on a digital camcorder in 2005, and I just want to say that for a film filmed on digital in 2005, like, I don't know, probably 480p at the max for like how good this film would have looked. This film looked like amazing. Like, the quality of this film was great. I mean, of course, sometimes it looks a little pixelated, especially in more dark environments and when there's like a light shining right on the camera. You know, it looks digital, right? But it looks like really good for a digital film. It looks like it could be like 720 or 1080p. It looks good. It looks good quality. It's not the best quality I've ever seen. It's not as good as something filmed on film, but for a film filmed on a digital camcorder in 2005, this looks really good. And I think Janus Film did a very good job at restoring this film, because this is one of the best remasters I've ever seen of something filmed on digital in 2005.
But let's not get carried away here. This is about the contents of the movie, not the way it looked. And even outside of the camcorder aspect, this is definitely David Lynch's most experimental film. He didn't actually have a real script written for it. Instead, David just filmed the ideas for the movie as he had them, and this definitely shows in the final product.
Most of David Lynch's movies are abstract in one way or another, but they still feel so well coordinated and put together like a puzzle, just waiting for you to solve it. Like, it's long out for you, like, please solve me. But this is not really that. There are a lot of ideas I enjoy in this film. I really like the main premise of an actress slowly losing her sanity as reality and the fictional world that her film takes place in start to meld together to the point where you don't even know what's real and not anymore. That's an amazing premise. And I think that this film could have been executed masterfully by David Lynch himself. I think that this would make a great David Lynch film, but the way it's made in its present form isn't really my thing, and I don't think it's as great as his other movies. It had me intrigued for a lot of it, but as it goes on, I feel like it slowly goes off the rails, to the point where things don't even come back around anymore. I feel like sometimes in this movie, weird things are just happening for the sake of them happening.
We go from a bunch of dancing prostitutes to humanoid bunnies to Polish people to domestic violence and a whole bunch of other random stuff.
I like a lot of these ideas, and I even think they could work in the same film, but the looseness of the movie just doesn't work for me as much as David's normally very tight-knitted scripts. The film just feels very bloated and stretched out, especially with the runtime of 3 hours. David Lynch does work with longer runtimes, but that's because of how well coordinated they feel. For example, in Mulholland Drive, that movie is 2.5 hours long, but I never feel the length because every single thing that happens in that movie works to progress the story. Everything in the movie comes back around on itself, and it's clear that it happens for a reason. Here, that same conciseness and a well-coordinated feel of David Lynch's other movies just... I really think that after Mulholland Drive, David Lynch realized he made the best thing he could have made, and he did everything that he could have feasibly accomplished in his entire career. So as for his next film, he decided to just go off the rails, throw all of his cards on the table, and make whatever he wanted. It feels like he had so many different ideas for what he wanted to make in a movie, and instead of writing a script with all of those ideas and perfectly balancing them and coordinating them well, he just kind of jumped into it and started throwing the ideas right out of his head. And that's what he did. He literally said he did not write a script for this movie. If you watch any interviews for this movie, he did not write a script. He just filmed ideas as he had them. And, that makes this movie feel really crazy and cool, because this is looking into the mind of David Lynch himself. This is his creative process. But also, it makes it kind of bloated and messy and long, because this is just Lynch at his true and his most raw, his most experimental yet. And that makes this not that great. I love Lynch's work, and I love the things he's able to make, and I love his crazy and zany and wacky and surreal and almost disorienting ideas in his film. But I think that in this film, he didn't really develop them well enough before he started filming it. I respect David Lynch for making this film. He perfected his style, and he just decided to go off the rails for his next film. He decided to make something that not everyone would understand, probably not anyone would. Probably he doesn't understand this. But he decided to make it anyway, because what else did he have to lose? And I think that's cool. That's great. Even though if I'm not entirely on board with the film. So I think I'll give this one a 7 out of 10, even if I don't fully like it. And it might be closer to a 6, but I'm gonna give this one a 7 for now. But with all that being said, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.